In this video, we're going to learn about the Renaissance. And the Renaissance actually means the rebirth. It was an important time in our history where we discovered various parts of the world, art, history, music, literature. There was a family in Italy who were instrumental in this, playing a part in the Renaissance, and it was the Medici family. They funded and supported and aided people, scientists, artists, architects in pursuing knowledge and to grow a better world for man. In the 1400s, people from Europe knew very little about the rest of the world. Europeans only started to discover the world 600 years ago. And if you look at the timeline or the history of man, it's a short time ago. And what I want to show you is a map of the world in the 1400s and what the Europeans knew of the world, what they'd discovered. You can see on the map, you can see that this is one that's been drawn during those times. You can see the top of Africa, you can see Europe, the Middle East, and a little bit of Asia. I've put it onto a modern map where you can see it's been highlighted in red. And if you look at it compared to the rest of the world, it's a small part. If you look at the rest of Asia, North America, South America, Africa, Australia, New Zealand, they hadn't been discovered. So it was basically the rest of the world just lay undiscovered by the Europeans. There was very little economy, and most of the art revolved around a church. If you look at this timeline, you can see that Great Zimbabwe was at its height during this time, the same time as the Renaissance, and it was between the Middle and Colonial Ages. So it was early modern history, and you can put it into relation or relate it to what was happening at Mapungubwe at that time. What was the Renaissance? It was a period of time from the 14th to the 17th century in Europe, and the word Renaissance means rebirth, as I said. So, what led to this rebirth in Europe? There were a few things that happened that led to the Renaissance, and see if you can see any similarity to what is actually happening with us on Earth today. The first thing that led, as you can see on these pictures, was the Black Death. It was a parasite carried by fleas. It was a disease that was carried by fleas who lived on rats. And it affected many, many, many people in Europe. It marked an end of an era in Italy and Europe, and it killed millions of people, and it spread very, very quickly. And I'm sure there's some light bulbs going off about how we can relate it into today's world. And the Black Death occurred in 1347, and its impact was intense, and it resulted in a wide-ranging social, economic, cultural, religious changes after it was over. These changes directly and indirectly led to the emergence of the Renaissance, one of the greatest eras in our history for art, architecture, literature, and of man. The Renaissance was a time of coming out of the dark. It was the rebirth of education, science, literature, music, and a better life for people in general. And it made people re-look at ancient Greek and Roman teachings. They were questioning what had actually happened. And if you have a look, you can see one of the other points that happened was in the Middle Ages, known as medieval times, people began to it was the beginning of the fall of the Roman Empire, meaning the Romans were no longer the most powerful society. They had ruled most of the world as they saw it, and thereafter history and the rise of the Ottoman Empire and the rise of Christianity and Islam occurred. So instead of it being a Roman Catholic church, it became Christianity. Such many of the advances that occurred were in science, art, and how governments work, and that had been made by the Greeks and Romans before this time, and it was lost during this time. Part of the Middle Ages is actually called the Dark Ages because so much of what was learned earlier was lost and nobody bothered to keep any records. I've put two very famous people that had a big influence on the Renaissance at that time, and that was Leonardo da Vinci. You can see there his picture of the Last Supper, he's painting the Mona Lisa, and he learnt and he shared a lot of information about the anatomy of man, helicopters, all those discoveries that he'd made at that time. On the left-hand side, you can see Michelangelo, you can see the Pieta where Mary's taken Jesus off the cross. It's in marble. The intricate details, you can see veins, you can see lines, you can see all of that information on those sculptures and paintings that he'd done at that time. One of the first European settlers found in southern Africa, who found southern Africa, was Bartholomew Dias. He sailed around the tip of southern Africa, and he was a Portuguese explorer, and he was funded by the royal family of that time because the Portuguese were known as mariners, to be the heroes of the sea. It was in 1487 that Dias' ships left Portugal, and on his way down from Portugal, he erected limestone pradows along the west coast of Africa, and these statues claimed the continent, and they were also used as guideposts. In 1488, his ship sailed off the coast of southern Africa, and on the 3rd of February 1488, he landed in Mossel Bay. He encountered some Khoi people who threw stones at them, and the Portuguese returned fire and killed one of the Khoi with a bow and arrow. The Portuguese then sailed past the southern tip of Africa and continued to what is today known as Khwai-Hoek. And they erected, it's on the Eastern Cape, and they erected a padrow, and then they actually returned home because they were ill. The next explorer circumnavigated Africa. He was Vasco da Gama, and this was 10 years later. He landed along the east coast of Africa, and he was asked to find an alternative route to the east from the west because the Arabs were controlling the sea route that directly went to India. So they then decided to go around Africa to see if they could continue off Dias's journey to reach the east. He reached India on May the 20th in 1948, and the Cape of Good Hope became the official link between the West and the East, and it was the trade route. And this would occur and continue to occur into modern day times. If you see on the right hand side, I've put a picture of the Caravella. That was the ship that the Portuguese used at that time of sailing and discovering areas on Earth.